We start this hour in the Middle East. The White House has said Israel has accepted a new US-backed ceasefire proposal for Gaza. The plan was put forward by President Donald Trump and his Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff. According to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, Israel signed off on the proposal before it was submitted to Hamas.
I can confirm that Special Envoy Witkoff and the President submitted a ceasefire proposal to Hamas that Israel backed and supported. Israel signed off on this proposal before it was sent to Hamas. I can also confirm that those discussions are continuing, and we hope that a ceasefire in Gaza will take place so we can return all of the hostages home, and that's been a priority from this administration from the beginning. I won't comment further as we are in the midst of this right now.
However, it's been reported that Hamas officials say the group will reject the proposal as the latest terms fall short of its demands, including an end to the war, troop withdrawal and unrestricted aid access. According to sources, the plan calls for a 60-day truce with two phased exchanges of living and dead hostages for Palestinian prisoners. Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is said to have discussed the ongoing efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza in a phone call with Hamas political bureau officials and Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister to discuss the developments in Gaza. Meanwhile, the United Nations has warned that Israel's decision to approve 22 new settlements in the West Bank pushes efforts towards a two-state solution in the wrong direction. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric reiterated calls for Israel to halt all settlement activity, describing it as a major obstacle to peace and development. The settlements were announced by hardline Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, despite warnings from allies threatening targeted sanctions. He said that the settlements will be located in the north of the territory. Britain, France and Canada have called the plan a direct threat to the viability of a future Palestinian state. Well, joining us to discuss all of these developments in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict and wider region is Ross Feingold, a political risk analyst who is joining us from Taipei. Ross, let's first explore this new US proposal. Israel says yes, Hamas says no. Why do you think Hamas has taken this stance, considering they themselves said that they'd agreed to a very similar deal that was an initial Steve Witkoff proposal from some time ago?
The issue for Hamas is the proposal lacks a guarantee that hostilities will come to an end. There's no commitment by Israel to stop the war. So even if this ceasefire lasts for 60 days, at the end of that period, the war might resume. And this is a condition that Hamas finds unacceptable.
Yes, Ross, let's look at some specifics of this deal. I want to correct myself from the beginning of the programme. It will be 10 living hostages and the bodies of 18 dead hostages. Given the ongoing situation as well in Gaza with humanitarian organisations talking about famine and starvation, how important is it for both sides that a deal is agreed as soon as possible?
For Israel, they want to reduce the negative publicity and the ill will. Recently, specifically in Western Europe, with the denial of food aid or the very limited amount of food aid that has entered Gaza in recent days. So although that negative publicity or pressure from outside of Israel, it doesn't really change how Netanyahu proceeds with fighting the war. But I think Israel at some level is sensitive to the criticism, even if they don't want to admit that they are. So resuming large-scale shipments of food and medicine into Gaza, it certainly would help alleviate some of the PR problems that Israel has. I mean, for Hamas, they are nominally still the government. They have an obligation to see that the people are fed, and they don't want their own people to be mad at them. And we've seen some protests by Gazans against Hamas. There are some people who blame Hamas for the war and blame Hamas for the conditions that Gazans are now living in. And Hamas is sensitive to that. So they also want to see a resumption of a larger amount of food aid.
Yes, and Ross, along the bottom of the screen, we've got some further information about this Israeli potential settlement in the West Bank. There has been condemnation from a few countries talking about it limiting the possibility of a two-state solution. Why do you think some Western nations have decided to shift their stance against Israel in relation to not just these settlements but also the ongoing offensive in the Gaza Strip?
Well, some of these countries have long opposed Israeli settlements in the West Bank, so they're being consistent with their past policies, and they are willing to be openly critical of Israel when Israel does announce expansion of settlements in the West Bank. So there really isn't anything new there. When it comes to their criticism of the war in Gaza, I think it's just based on the ongoing humanitarian situation, and they do have domestic pressure as well. There are periodic protests in those countries. So it's been a long and slow process for some of those Western European governments, but given the food situation, they're more willing recently to be openly critical of Israel.
Yes, Ross, you will be staying with us. We're going to also stay in the Middle East, as Israel has said that it has intercepted a missile fired from Yemen after air raid sirens sounded across central Israel and explosions were heard over Jerusalem. The army confirmed the missile was shot down before reaching its target. Well, Yemen's Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility. Let's take a listen.
نفذت القوة الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية استهدفت مطار اللد المسمى إسرائيليا مطار بن غوريون في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي فرط صوتي، وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله، وأجبرت ملايين الصهاينة المحتلين على الهروب إلى الملاجئ ووقف حركة الملاحة في المطار.
Well, this is the latest in a series of attacks launched by the Houthis since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. The Houthis have repeatedly targeted Israel over the war and in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza.